So welcome everyone. Welcome Carina. Great to have you. I like to start those webinars with a fun fact from the guest. So that's your go to have a funny fun fact. And I've got high expectations. Be careful, Carina.
A funny fun fact. I'm actually going to use one I've shared before. A fun fact is I've actually been on TV twice in Costa Rica. One time I was on TV for a business that I had in Costa Rica, and it was like a daytime show that wanted to share the business and the products that we were selling. And then the next time I didn't realize I was on TV. I was doing like one of these Ninja Warrior type events in Costa Rica, funnily in a car park at a shopping center in Costa Rica. But supposedly I was on a sports channel and my friends just sent me a video and I was on TV and I had a commentator and everything. So random things happen.
I will need a proof of that.
I will definitely, I will share it. If you can speak Spanish, there you go.
Yeah, okay, that's beside the point. I'll learn it just for that. So, well, that's now. Let's see, a celebrity here. That's great to share. Now, on the less or as funny or less or as serious, I don't know, aspect is give us a bit about who is e-commerce nurse. Are you the nurse? Why aren't you wearing any, white hats and masks and stuff? And about vendor society, maybe.
Yeah, sure. So there's lots of nurses now these days, and we're basically there to help businesses when it comes to figuring out what to do with e-commerce and selling on Amazon and other channels. So we're predominantly an Amazon focused agency, similar to e-commerce, and we work with brands in North America and Europe and help them grow their business in the e-commerce world, as I mentioned, in particular Amazon. And we also have another business, Vendor Society, and Vendor Society is where we have a community of vendors across the globe. And when I say vendors, I'm talking about Amazon vendors, and where we have roundtables, and we've had public events as well, where we have a group of vendors that come together and share their experiences. Often ends up being a bit of a therapy session, in all honesty, discussing pain points, but very much it's about trying to bring vendors together to be able to share the different experiences and learnings and best practices when it comes to Amazon.
Okay. Like, no surprise when your name is like you've got nurse in your name that you end up doing therapy, right?
Well, like, there we go.
Like there is an element of logic about it. There's a loop. So the topic of today is one I like very much, is as helping brands grow on Amazon, specifically in Europe. That question comes very often about what's the best to do, pan-European or country-focused, and the best approach for sellers and vendors. First, maybe you could give an overview. What's the difference between pan-EU or country-focused, like in general terms?
Yeah, definitely. So first off, you've got the localized approach. And what we mean by that is that you decide on which country you sell in. And it could be in each marketplace within Europe, but very much you are focusing on functioning in that country. So you have inventory in that country. Let's say you're holding inventory in the UK and you sell to the UK customer. You may then have inventory in Germany, you sell to the German customer. And it's very a fragmented way of working. You can work like that on seller. You can also, where you're selling direct to consumer via Seller Central, or you could also work that way via Vendor Central as well as a vendor when you're selling to Amazon on a wholesale relationship. So it may be that you have a vendor account in each country and you're supplying your goods to each of those countries. So that's very much a localized approach. Now, then we start going towards this pan-European, and pan-European is when you work across all marketplaces. And this is something that's easier to do on the seller side, because as you know, if you're a seller already, you'll see that you have a unified account on Seller Central. So you have access to all the different marketplaces: Italy, Spain, Germany, France, UK, and now the Netherlands. And you can sell on all of those. And what pan-European means is that you're able to sell on all those marketplaces, and your inventory is then shared and moved around effectively those countries, and will be placed in the countries where there's that higher demand as well. So you start treating Amazon Europe as one, as opposed to separate countries, although Europe as one is definitely questionable given the different countries' compliance and everything. So that's probably a wrong way to put it. Or is sometimes the miscommunication, in all honesty, that there is that pan-European, but often what is pan-European really? And then of course you can work pan-European with Amazon as a vendor as well. And then you have this semi-pan-European, I call it a semi-pan-European approach, but it's really half and half, where you've kind of got a pan-European operation. Maybe you're working as a seller on multi-country, so you might have that approach with Germany and the UK, and not so much in other marketplaces as well.
Why would
an overview?
Yeah, why would you do that semi one? What's the benefits? Because it sounds like it's something probably which is often done, right? To focus on, like, UK and Germany is a good example because those are the two biggest markets. Is that the best of two worlds, or?
Yeah, well, if we focus on the seller side of things, so there's the three ways. And when I say localized, that's if you just want to deal with specific countries, but there's also this European fulfillment network, which I didn't mention, which is when you hold inventory in one country, but you can still sell in all those other countries. You just hold your inventory in that one location. And then if, for example, your inventory is in the UK, and then you have your products listed on Amazon Germany, and a customer in Germany places an order, if you're doing FBA, your inventory in the UK is then an item will then be shipped from the UK to Germany. And that's known as a European fulfillment network. So a lot of businesses go with that route. And the reason why I'm explaining it is because it kind of makes sense when we go on to multi-country, because EFN just means that it means that you've just got inventory in that one location. You don't have to start dealing with VAT if you're under the threshold in all these other marketplaces, which is the challenges with pan-European, which we can go on to. But what that means is when you are doing European fulfillment network, you have to start paying these cross-border fees, and there's longer shipping time for your product to cross the border over to Germany and for your product to be sent to Germany. So sometimes businesses then take this multi-country approach where they say, okay, well, I know that the UK's the biggest marketplace in Europe, and so is Germany. I'm not so concerned about France, Italy, and Spain at the moment. So I want to make sure that I have product for next day delivery in Germany and in the UK, and I don't deal with these cross-border fees that add to my margin. Or impact my margin. So you then decide, okay, I'm going to hold inventory in Germany, and then I'm going to hold inventory in the UK. So that would be more sort of that middle ground. And we often find that businesses that are first going into the UK will either go with a localized option, or the European fulfillment that I mentioned, where you hold inventory in one country, but you still sell product in the countries and just fulfill from one location. Or you choose the biggest markets that you want to be in and focus on those.
So we basically having local stock in the UK, local stock in Germany, and have these two do the European fulfillment network for the other four now, because we have Holland, like France, yeah, Spain, Italy, and Holland. But that so that sounds very much of a seller approach. But we talk about EFN also for vendors, right? There's a similar approach for vendors.
Yeah, and often vendors aren't aware of EFN until they start working with Amazon. So for example, you might be a vendor, you work with Amazon in the UK. Next minute you're on Amazon in Spain, and lo and behold, your products are on Amazon Spain without you realizing or being notified. Typically, Amazon will take any listings that they have in that country, identify there's a selection gap, let's say within France, and then actually take those listings, translate them, and start selling them in France. As long as they're compliant, there's no reason why they shouldn't. And that's something that's just almost something that you have to suck up if you're dealing with Amazon, really. You don't really have a say in that. And that can be a positive and it can be a negative. It can be a positive to some businesses are like, fantastic, I can't be bothered to we have to deal with all these other countries. If Amazon is managing it, then great. But some see it as a negative because it's all about control. All of a sudden, their products are up on France. Maybe they don't want their products in France. Maybe they have a territory agreement with a distributor in France. And then that then creates conflict with a relationship. Or maybe Amazon have just translated it and done some terrible translations and not really put the brand in the best light. And so, yeah, Amazon play around with this whole European fulfillment network in different ways with vendor and seller. But the ultimate goal here is about being able to get the products in front of as many customers as possible.
And from what I remember, or having some discussion with on the vendor side, is that sometimes you like, if you don't want Amazon sell in some countries, like it's happening even if you don't want it, like it will happen in like you've listed it in the UK and then all of a sudden it appears in France. And reversely, sometimes you want it to happen and it's not happening very well. Like sometimes you like a brand with multiple vendor accounts saying, okay, I'm based in the UK or I'm based in Germany and I want to simplify my logistics. So I would like to have Amazon order only from one country. So how do you try to enforce that? I know sometimes they add a fee for EFN. Like how would you approach that and saying, okay, when you want to simplify your logistics and like push EFN? Yeah,
or from the vendor side.
Yes.
Yeah, well, then that comes more down to if you want to push it. I think there are two things there. There's one, where you do want that pan-European approach, right? Where you want all your products on all those countries, but you don't want to have to deal with every single country because it requires a lot of resource. And that's then down to the pan-European way of working on vendor. And that can work really well, but sometimes if you're already set up on Amazon, trying to negotiate from having a localized approach to a pan-European on the vendor side is tough, because you've probably got variances in costs in different countries, different commercial terms, and trying to get them to be the same across all becomes a challenge, because some are going to be more favorable in one country, some are going to be less favorable in the other. So trying to get that agreed. So that's one thing. But then we also find that we've had brands that we've worked with where they have products in one country and they're then working, and then they want their products to appear in that other country, and Amazon's just not putting them on that other country. And it's coming like, well, normally you would, why are you not doing that now? And that becomes a challenge. And that's all about demand as well, as in Amazon identifying demand. And if they don't see demand for your products possibly in that country, or they're not strong enough in the current marketplace, then they're probably not so interested. So then it's a question of how do you increase that demand and those views and everything to make Amazon believe that actually there's opportunity for these products in that marketplace.
And one question about like when you've got a vendor account, let's say in Germany, and you say, okay, I'd like to expand in the UK, and like you said, like the products are not the translation is really bad, and I want to take control of the content. Like, what's the best option? Is it to try to go through because you don't have access to your catalog in the UK, right? When you've got a
Yeah.
vendor account, a German vendor account. So what's your suggestion to tackle that, saying, okay, I'd like to push myself in the UK, and clearly with my German vendor account, it's not working very well. So
Yeah. A lot depends on the success of the brand, the type of product category. So it's never sort of a one answer, because it gets confusing, because then you're starting to play, not only are you playing with this possible hybrid approach, you're playing with a hybrid approach across 5 marketplaces. And that becomes the real challenge, right? Because what could happen is you say, you could start listing your products on, so you've got a vendor account in Germany. Let's say you can't get a UK vendor account. Yes, put it that way. And your listings aren't on the UK. Then you decide to have a seller account. So then you list all your products on the seller account. And let's say this is a product that doesn't have a plug or voltage, so it can be sold across continental Europe and the UK. So you then think, okay, well, I can't get a UK vendor central account. I'm going to get a seller account. I'm going to list all the UK products in the seller account. Demand starts to increase. Lo and behold, Amazon start to see that. You might then find that you are all of a sudden selling your products on Amazon vendor in the UK, which you wanted in the first place, but Amazon weren't taking advantage of the EFN, and then they didn't want to work with you as a vendor. So it's an interesting one. And then what you've got to think about is this whole long term and repercussions of everything that you do, as in, okay, what is your overall EU approach? Because if you start treating every marketplace differently, like, oh, I'll be a vendor here, a seller in this country, a vendor in this country, that's when it becomes difficult, because of this whole EFN. If you just decide to be a seller across all of the countries, and you decide whether you want to be EFN, multi-country, pan-European, then that's a lot easier to manage because you're in control of it. But as soon as you start mixing that up with vendor, that becomes quite a challenge. And so it's really good to be very clear on your strategy from day one, although that's easier said than done.
As well, yeah, as we both know. And from what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that you would say, okay, when we're talking about pan EU, seller is much easier. So probably if you want to have a simple life, you should go like to a seller. So like if you've got a vendor account in somewhere and you want to expand into another country, the option A, which is the simplest, the easiest, is to open a seller account and to generate demand from your seller account. Am I correct?
Yeah, the seller account gives you that ability to maneuver quite easily across each country. But the seller account having a seller account does require more resource than a vendor account as well. So you do have that to take into consideration. However, you have that unified account. When you start working on vendor, it's not unified. Well, you're seeing slight changes to try and make it unified, but it's this whole thing of trying to negotiate a pan-European agreement is definitely what you then want for vendor, because otherwise you're finding you've got a vendor account in the UK, France, Italy, Spain, Germany. You've then got an advertising account in each of those countries, and everything becomes not so integrated. I mean, you've then got to set your products up in one country and then in another and then in another. And it can become quite painful. Now, long term, my guess is that will become unified as well. You know, if you think about Amazon and the way they work, they see Amazon at an EU level. This whole pan EU way of working is, for me, in my eyes, a natural evolution of how things will go. But at the same time,
it's like it's a natural one, but it's not something we're seeing happening, right? It's more like every country is like, in some categories they seem to have those pan EU people, but lots of categories, like each guy, even if they're so-called like European heads, like they're very much looking at their own country, not very much to the others, right?
yeah.
So it sounds like they have a governance kind of issue for me. Like they've organized the organization is very local, but they would like to be pan-European, but actually, like the way they've organized it and to whom they're reporting is not aligned with what they would or what we believe they're wanting to do, right?
Yeah, like there's no EU report, you know, you can't, even on seller, you can't just get a top level view of how is my business at a European level. Because it's surely if I'm doing pan-European, I want to see it at that level. No, you have to look at a business report, and this is vendor and seller for each marketplace, which then becomes quite difficult to manage. And a lot also depends on you as a business. What's your setup? Because if your business is very centralized, then of course you're going to want it to be as centralized as possible. But we also deal with brands that, to be honest, are very, we only deal with the UK things. And then you got, you need to speak to the German team for that. And so if you are as a business quite fragmented in your approach, then probably a very centralized Amazon strategy might not necessarily work for your business because you're not necessarily set up for that.
That's for sure. And we see it. And I often say the bigger the company, the more complex it is for them to handle Amazon, because the bigger the company, and usually they're very local organized, and a lot of brands we're having, they have to create a special Amazon team, which is taking everybody into account, or like having a broader view than only a country. So that's often a big struggle, and smaller company are more agile to that and having a less harder time. And if I come back to my example, so you have a brand with a vendor account in one country and they want to expand, but they say, no, I can't have a seller account because, let's say the typical one, I don't want my retailers to see that I'm selling direct. It would be a like starting war, I'm afraid, blah, blah, blah. What would you say, like, would you say, okay, you should try to open a dummy vendor account or like a semi vendor account, or should you try to get a vendor invitation? What's your best tip in that case?
Yeah, if you're a vendor and you just don't want to take that seller route, because there are businesses that just don't want to upset the retailers, then you've got to figure out how you can expand your products across Europe. Now, it again comes down to, if Amazon aren't already selling your products in other marketplaces and already taking advantage of the European fulfillment network that we've spoken about, the question first I would be asking is, why is that? You know, what's the reason why they haven't actually just taken your listings and put them into other countries? Is the demand not there, or could it be another reason?
But sometimes also you're not very happy with the content, which is not. And I'm not talking about pictures, because obviously pictures are shared between countries, but like the text titles, and like you don't like the view of what you're seeing. So
in those instances, well, there's a couple of points here. Sometimes you are able to get a vendor dummy account for those countries where you go in and you own the content and you just list the content, but you're not actually selling from those accounts. You might not want to, but you still get to drive the content and get access to that. And then you can access advertising. So some businesses do that. Now, if that's not possible, there's nothing harming you from opening a seller account, locking your content in there, but not selling through it. So just because you have a seller account doesn't mean you have to sell product through that account. More and more businesses are using that to own their content. So we know businesses that just have a seller essential account. Their business is through distributors. They don't want to deal outside. They don't want to deal direct to consumer, but they want to own their content. So in that instance, they have a seller essential account enrolled in the brand registry, their content sets precedence, set up all the listings, inventory to zero, and then they've combated that. So it really depends on, I guess, on how many doors and options are available to you.
Makes a lot of sense. So today you would say, okay, when in the situation of, how do you see, like we touched a bit about on how Amazon is evolving, and I know we've had numerous discussions about how do we believe if seller and vendor accounts would merge. Clearly, the seller accounts are getting more and more like features, especially with brand registration. Do you see them merging? Because I still don't like. I see intellectually it makes sense, but in what is happening, I don't see that really, because R is so different to seller business reports. It's like so many things which are technically and like yeah, from the approach totally different, that I don't see that really happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I think there are elements where at the start the systems were so far apart, and there were marketing tools that really were the same on both, and so it's make sense to have synergies, well, not synergies, to just streamline those and make them similar, and almost it's now, as we say, fair play. You know, it's fair in the sense of the tools that are available to vendor and tools that are available to seller almost. And so it makes sense that Amazon will streamline them, because before they've got developers working on one tool, developers working on another. They've all got their own different objectives and roadmaps, and it becomes, so I would say the guess is that it's more of a harmonized roadmap now between the two. But there's always going to be differences, because seller is always direct to consumer and vendor is always going to be wholesale. And so there
I
are
don't see
elements.
Amazon giving up like the chance of driving prices down.
Exactly. So it's about streamlining, I would say, activities that make sense, and giving them, and trying to give as many tools that for both. And because what we've seen recently is even brand analytics is now available to vendor as well. And so that's, even that reporting side of things is becoming a lot more synchronized. But then purchase orders is not going to be anything related to seller, and FBA and all of that is not going to be anything related to vendor.
Yeah.
Whether you end up with one platform and different functions, who knows? But I would definitely say it makes sense for them to streamline processes that can be applied to both. But there's always going to be an element of difference, because they're two very different fulfillment channels.
And different teams inside Amazon. So as long
Exactly.
as you have different teams, it will be different point of view, because they have all a lot of liberty to do stuff. So that's one thing. I have two questions coming up. One is, we've seen in Europe specifically, not very much in the States, but in Europe, it's becoming increasingly difficult to open a seller account for bigger companies, because Amazon is starting, they want all the legal people involved in the company, like all the signature holders, and you need to add so much information, and the risk of being suspended it feels to me that it's getting greater with time than before. Like even not many years ago, but like 1 or 2 years ago, it was much easier. But now, for some accounts, for us, it's taking, and the bigger the company, the more complex it is. It's like it's taking ages, because then you can get flagged for this, flagged for that, because the some element of the address here doesn't match with another one, and it becomes like very cumbersome and a bit clumsy. Do you see that also? And do you think that may change the way people would see, and that seller is probably becoming a bit more difficult than before?
Yeah, I think it's almost a way of how they're managing it all. It's the typical thing of Amazon trying to automate and streamline processes too much, to the point that there's no reading between the lines. And I guess we're talking predominantly about account verification, and it becomes a challenge, because if there's a couple of words out on a title and address, and they're trying to mirror it, which half the time the documents that you have are never mirrored anyway, because every sort of different company out there writes your address differently or grabs data differently, and it becomes a challenge. And we do see that as a battle. I would say definitely more from a point where Amazon starts streamlining those processes, where they pass that on to a team who basically have the checklist, And it's kind of like the computer says no, it's just sort of reading through the checklist and then it's out. It's like, and so that becomes a challenge. But if a company is at a size of, is a certain size, that company should be thinking about trying to reach out directly to the Seller Central team, as in trying to get an account manager to onboard them from day one, as well.
But from our experience, it's like the account performance team is like it's hidden. Even the account managers can only ping them and say, okay, escalate it a bit. But it's like they're still giving a lot of power to the seller performance team, which can like rule if you can sell or cannot sell, which is a bit surprising to like specifically people not knowing Amazon. Say, what, just call them and tell them that's us. And it's not like there's no phone number, right? Like, do you see that as something which could change things a bit? Because I've seen like posts of people making like asking for people to sign to a petition, say, okay, to ask Amazon to stop blocking sellers all the time. Do you think that could be a game changer or not? You don't see that very much, as it not so much?
No, I think it's all this thing of where Amazon just implements systems that, to be honest, they don't necessarily thoroughly think about all the repercussions and the challenges that come with it. And they grow at such a pace that half the time things just aren't working right. And then they realize that down the line and try and do more. So you start seeing things in the system, like account verification. You start seeing an area where you can start saying, oh, I need more help with this. And you start seeing more features in Seller Central. And then you get excited because you think, oh, have they finally cottoned on that they really need to hold people's hands a bit more to at least get sellers on board, given that they're trying to get more sellers on board. It's not like they've closed the gates. And then all of a sudden, nothing. And so it's kind of almost half there, half not. And so I think it's a point. I mean, the ideal solution would be, yes, they do have a department there that does focus on signing brands, and those that struggle with getting sign off and that, helping them through the process and actually giving them information, as in why an account hasn't been verified. Because the biggest issue with Amazon is the ambiguity of it all. As in, oh, we can't verify your account. Well, why not? Because you might be missing one of these, and you have to really push to get an answer. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So I often think that that's the biggest challenge sometimes, is that you as a seller really want to fix something and you want to know, but Amazon doesn't give you enough. And it's a bit of a guessing game. But really, if Amazon were less ambiguous and shared more, that would help you as a business. It's not like you want to cheat the system. You just want to know what the issue is to be able to solve it. And guesswork is, it's a bit of playing a game, really. That's not, the results I would not say are effective.
And going on another side of another ugly side, let's say, of it's like, for vendors, like I remember, like A+, you had to pay for Vine, you had to pay quite a lot of money, and all that is made free for sellers. So at the same time, so it's a question on the other side, is like, because it's different teams and they probably come from a different point of view. But it's like, does it make any sense to be a vendor? It's like, it seems like Amazon was asking for loads of money, like AVS or lots of things where you have to pay on the vendor side, and then suddenly you're on the seller side and it's all for free.
Yeah, I think it all depends. I think this is it. Before, years and years ago, you would be able to go, oh, well, these are all the benefits to why you should be a vendor. And then they had Vendor Express, and everyone was getting a Vendor Express account to try and get a loophole to be able to access Vine, sponsored brands, or they were called headline ads at the time, and all these different things. But Amazon's made it pretty equal. In fact, more favorable, as you say, on the seller side. But then it comes down to a question of what really is your setup? Because some businesses aren't set up for direct to consumer and don't want to be, like you mentioned earlier about they don't want to compete with their other retailers. So then that's really, I think what Amazon have done is almost said, well, this is it almost equal, apart from the fact you still have to pay for Vine on vendor. It's all down to business, what your model is. And if your model makes sense to be wholesale, you should be a vendor. If your model makes sense and is very direct to consumer, you should be a seller. And I think that is the line. But the waters have been so muddied. There was this, it used to be very clear from the days when I was working at Amazon. It was very clear who should be a vendor and who should be a seller. But then all the waters got muddied with this whole vendor express and everything.
Is
And
it could it be possibly because Amazon doesn't have a very clear vision itself about that, that it's like leaving a lot of leeway because it's a very entrepreneurial kind of environment, like any category manager or like vendor manager or marketplace manager, it's got a lot of room and can do a lot of things by himself, that it's like it ends up from our end to look like it's very muddy, but because just say don't really care about having a very clear guideline for that. Could that be?
yeah, I think the thing is, the whole online world in general, it grows so quick, and it almost grows, sometimes it can grow in a different direction to what you originally expected. Like an example of, did Amazon really believe that Amazon FBA would be as successful as it is? Did they really believe that a seller would be stronger almost than retail? And so all these different things come into play. And so I think there's an element of thinking through stuff, but not being, not really understanding what ends up being a success can sometimes almost be a surprise. And so then the strategies might not have been built as clear as a result of that. And I think it's more about, it's just a very fast growing company that's evolving and doing things so quickly that it's almost, it can't keep up, and other people are finding loopholes and everything as well.
I have a question from the crowd, and the question is, can the type of product you sell have any effect on whether you should go pan-EU or country specific, like category as categories to bear in mind when you're choosing the way you want to sell?
I think when you're selling, it depends on your product in terms of whether or not you can sell in those countries to start off with. Because let's say if you're selling a food supplement or grocery product, you're going to have to make sure you adhere to all the labeling and all the compliance there, which will be very different to selling, I'm trying to think of a trainer or an item of clothing possibly across the EU. So those are the things that you would need to consider more from a compliance side of things, as opposed to whether or not it makes sense to sell.
Maybe the size to value, basically like the logistics cost of moving things around, like the bigger you are, specifically if you're not too expensive, that probably has a big impact on like the cost of logistics.
Yeah, definitely. If you're dealing with heavy, bulky products, let's say you work in sports and fitness and you're dealing with dumbbells and big weight plates, then of course you want to contemplate that's going to be quite costly from a shipping, and shipping that over to another country could be even more costly. But then it's then thinking that type of product, you might want to pull back and think, well, actually, do I even do FBA, or should I be doing FBM and fulfilling those orders myself, because I need to save on shipping costs? So I think that question brings in another element there, as in we're speaking a lot about pan-European from an FBA point of view on seller, but there's also, we need to remember that that's not the only option to sell to a customer. You can fulfill those orders directly yourself.
And so thank you very much. I have a question, another question which I see, which is about AVS. We've had a few talks about AVS ourselves. So AVS is basically the backup or like service internally from Amazon to help you grow on Amazon. So you get someone who's in your account manager and helps you like do your cataloging and lots of different things. What do you like when a brand asks you, is it worthwhile to have to do AVS? What do you say? Yes, maybe, no, not at all?
I think you just need to be very clear what you get for it. What are, it's all well and good saying, okay, I've got an AVS, but what's the expectation there, and what are you agreeing to? Because it's all about, you want evidence of you're paying for a certain amount of resource to give you a certain output. So what output do you get? And have you been working for a while, and have you seen that the correct output, the output that was agreed? Or is there a misaligned expectation there? And I think that's the main thing businesses should be pushing back and saying, okay, you want me to spend this much, what do I get for my money?
So it's very much about setting KPIs and checking if they're met. Yeah, okay. So is there, like, as a sum up to our discussion, would you say that if you're pan-EU or country focus, what's the best approach? Like, would you say it's based on your strategy? Like, if you want to be or the budget you have, what are the main sort of levers which will make you decide on one or the other? Like, or we said there was three basically: so local, like semi, and really fully going everywhere in every countries and stock everywhere. Like,
I would say if we focus on the seller, we just need to be, a lot comes down to investment. Because if you're going in all 5 marketplaces, you need to make sure that you are compliant for all 5 marketplaces, or 6 marketplaces now, sorry. You need to also ensure that you are speaking directly to the customer, as in your content is translated, but translated in a good, coherent, localized way, so the customer understands, and that requires an investment. Also, if you then decide to go pan-European, what that means is you're going to have a pan-European, means that Amazon, you deliver your inventory to one location, and Amazon then redistributes that inventory across all countries. And once your inventory is in each of those countries, becomes this tax obligation. Now, quick waiver, I'm not a tax specialist, so I can't go into that detail. So it's always good that you do speak with a tax specialist when dealing with Amazon Europe. But what it does mean is that you can then start needing to file for taxes in each of those countries. So if you are a big business, let's say, and you have the money to invest in each country to get yourself set up for VAT, to do all the compliance, or maybe your product already has all of that, then probably a pan-European approach makes sense. If you're a small business that's starting out in Europe, then pan-European is a big stretch, because you're going to see the biggest demand most probably in UK and DE, because that's where the biggest customer base is. Although you might find there's less competition in France, Italy and Spain. So that could be an option. But you might then say, okay, well, I want to just focus on the UK. Or I know Germany is a strong market, so I just focus on UK and Germany. And so that's when, so really a lot comes down to size, how you're currently set up. Most businesses that are new to Europe will probably tread in a couple of those marketplaces, or if they go quite wide, they often find that they need to rein it in, because your bandwidth is stretched, and so is your resource. And
so it's about your like strengths and weaknesses yourself, and how much you're ready to spend, also invest and look into VAT or different things. That's a great summary. I have another question, which will probably be our last question to summarize, is have you got any examples of company using the wrong approach for their brand, and how did they fix it?
I've actually seen in 2 ways. I've seen where, well, not necessarily where a brand has gone pan-European and started holding inventory, but we've seen it where a brand has just gone into too many countries at once, and it's like, well, just go into, focus on a couple or one, master that country, and then expand. And then we've seen it where they just want to go, well, we just want to grow, and so grow means being in every marketplace, but never really becoming a master in one. And so we have seen businesses do that, and then rein it in and start saying, well, actually, let's stop focusing on those other countries, because actually our focus needs to be on one. So we do see that, and we often question that if businesses come to us and go, well, we want to be doing more in France, Italy and Spain. It's like, well, you're not really doing anything in the UK at the minute. So, you know, let's focus on one thing. And so a lot comes down to focus as well. And then with other businesses, yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing, where people probably may have gone a bit too broad to start with.
Yeah. So
Than anything.
so and I think that's a great summary, and I think success on Amazon is a lot about focusing and a step-by-step approach. So it's step by step. Sometimes they have a very wide catalog. You need to be successful in a few products first before you get successful everywhere. And then it's also the same with countries, like start with one, do something right, and then before stretching everywhere, not being especially very successful. So that's great insight. So I think we've except if you have a question on your side, Carina. Otherwise, I think we're all done.
Okay, great. No, I'm all questioned out or spoken out. So I think we've covered, hopefully covered a lot. And it is quite complex, a complex subject. And I think, as you say, it's about focus, but I also think it's about making sure that you have a strategy, because actually when working with Amazon, it is strategic. You don't just throw your products on Amazon and see what happens. It is about planning, and the businesses that we have seen had the most success are those that have a very clear Amazon strategy and have really planned out and are focusing on what is going to be that give them the biggest ROI.
Amen to that. Well summarized. So thank you very much, Carina. It was a pleasure to have you this evening. And we'll be chatting very soon, I hope. And someday we'll meet again on conferences and stuff in real life, hopefully.
Yes, definitely. It's been some time. So thank you everybody for listening. Hope you found today insightful. And thanks once again for the invite.
It was a pleasure. Anytime. Thank you very much, Carina. Bye-bye.
Bye.